Welcome back to Wings of Bibles. I'm Dustin, and today we'll be covering 2-3-3 runway markings. There are three types of markings for runways: visual, non-precision instrument, and precision instrument. TBL 231 identifies the marking elements for each type of runway, and TBL 2-3-2 identifies runway threshold markings. So this first table is runway marking elements. So in the first column, we have the marking element, and these next columns are the runways, and if they have those marking elements. And X indicates that they do have those marking elements. Now, a little disclaimer, I haven't figured out what X1 and X2 means. All I know is that a visual runway has those, and so does non-precision and precision instrument runway. So for example, a visual runway, a non-precision instrument runway, and a precision instrument runway, they all have designation markings. Moving on, this is an example of those markings. So first we have the threshold marking. Threshold markings configuration A, designation markings, side stripes, touchdown zone markings, aiming point marking. Runway designators. Runway numbers and letters are determined from the approach direction. The runway number is the whole number nearest 1/10 the magnetic azimuth of the center line of the runway, measured clockwise from the magnetic north. The letters differentiate between left, right, or center parallel runways as applicable. For two parallel runways, it will be marked with left or right. For three parallel runways, it will either be marked left, center, or right. The runway center line identifies the center of the runway and provides alignment guidance during takeoff and landing. The center line consists of a line of uniformly spaced stripes and gaps. Runway aiming point marking. The aiming point marking serves as a visual aiming point for a landing aircraft. These two rectangular markings consist of a broad white stripe located on each side of the runway centerline and approximately 1,000 feet from the landing threshold, as shown in Figure 2-3-1. Precision instrument runway markings. Runway touchdown zone markers. The touchdown zone markings identify the touchdown zone for landing operations and are coded to provide distance information in 500 feet or 150-meter increments. These markings consist of groups of 1, 2, and 3 rectangular bars symmetrically arranged in pairs about the runway centerline, as shown in Figure 2-3-1. For runways having touchdown zone markings on both ends, those pairs of markings which extend within 900 feet or 270 meters of the midpoint between the thresholds are eliminated. So here's a diagram of non-precision instrument runway and visual runway markings. You can look through those. Runway side stripe markings. Runway side stripes delineate the edges of the runway. They provide a visual contrast between runway and the abutting terrain or shoulders. Side stripes consist of continuous white stripes located on each side of the runway, as shown in Figure 2-3-4. Runway shoulder markings. Runway shoulder stripes may be used to supplement runway side stripes to identify pavement areas contiguous to the runway sides that are not intended for use by aircraft. Runway shoulder stripes are yellow. Runway threshold markings. Runway threshold markings come in two configurations. They either consist of 8 longitudinal stripes of uniform dimensions disposed symmetrically about the runway centerline, as shown in Figure 2-3-1, or the number of stripes is related to the runway width as indicated in Table 2-3-2. A threshold marking helps identify the beginning of the runway that is available for landing. In some instances, the landing threshold may be relocated or displaced. So here's those runway threshold stripes decoded. So if the runway width is 60 feet, then we'll have 4 stripes. If the runway width is 200 feet, then we'll have 16 threshold stripes. Relocation of a threshold. Sometimes construction, maintenance, or other activities require the threshold to be relocated towards the rollout end of the runway. When a threshold is relocated, it closes not only a set portion of the approach end of the runway, but also shortens the length of the opposite direction runway. In these cases, a NOTAM should be issued by the airport operator identifying the portion of the runway that is closed. For example, runway 10 and 28 closed because the duration of the relocation can vary from a few hours to several months. Methods identifying the new threshold may vary. One common practice is to use a 10 feet wide white threshold bar across the width of the runway. Although the runway lights in the area between the old threshold and new threshold will not be illuminated, the runway markings in this area may or may not be obliterated, removed, or covered. Displaced threshold. A displaced threshold is a threshold located at a point on the runway other than the designated beginning of the runway. Displacement of a threshold reduces the length of the runway available for landings. The portion of runway behind a displaced threshold is available for takeoffs in either direction and landings from the opposite direction. A 10 feet wide white threshold bar is located across the width of the runway at the displaced threshold. White arrows are located along the center line in the area between the beginning of the runway and displaced threshold. White arrowheads are located across the width of the runway just prior to the threshold bar, as shown in Figure 2-3-4. Airport operator. When reporting the relocation or displacement of a threshold, the airport operator should avoid language which confuses the two. Demarcation bar. A demarcation bar delineates a runway with a displaced threshold from a blast pad, stopway, or taxiway that precedes the runway. A demarcation bar is 3 feet wide and yellow. Since it is not located on the runway as shown in Figure 2-3-6. Chevrons. These markings are used to show pavement areas aligned with the runway that are unusable for landing, takeoff, and taxiing. Chevrons are yellow. Runway threshold bar. A threshold bar delineates the beginning of the runway that is available for landing when the threshold has been relocated or displaced. A threshold bar is 10 feet in width and extends across the width of the runway as shown in Figure 2-3-4. So now we got a few diagrams here showing what we just talked about. And that is going to do it for this video on 2-3-3 runway markings. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one. See ya!